In a remote valley, far from the bustling world, there lay an ancient forest known as Eldergrove. The trees towered high, their gnarled branches intertwining like the fingers of a giant. Locals spoke of the forest in hushed tones, warning that it was a place where time stood still and shadows danced with malevolence. Many who entered Eldergrove never returned, and those who did spoke of strange whispers and fleeting figures that haunted their every step. One crisp autumn afternoon, a group of 5 friends, Mark, Lisa, Tom, Sarah, and Jake, decided to embark on an adventure into the heart of Eldergrove. They were thrill seekers, always looking for the next adrenaline rush, and the tales of the forest only fueled their excitement. Armed with flashlights, snacks, and a sense of invincibility, they ventured into the depths of the woods, laughter echoing through the trees. As they walked deeper into the forest, the sunlight began to fade, casting long shadows that danced ominously around them. The air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped the group. Mark, the self-proclaimed leader, suggested they set up camp for the night. They found a clearing surrounded by towering trees, their trunks thick and ancient. The friends gathered firewood and soon had a crackling fire that illuminated their faces and chased away the darkness. As night fell, the forest came alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the occasional snap of a twig. They shared stories, some light-hearted, others dark and eerie. But as the fire flickered, an uneasy feeling settled over them. Lisa, feeling a chill run down her spine, suggested they tell ghost stories. The others eagerly agreed, and one by one, they recounted tales of hauntings and unsolved mysteries. When it was Jake's turn, he leaned in closer to the fire, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Have you heard about the lost souls of Eldergrove?" he asked, his eyes glinting with mischief. Legend has it that those who wander too deep into the forest can hear the whispers of the lost souls, beckoning them to join them in eternal darkness. The group laughed nervously, but as the night wore on, the laughter faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing their fire and plunging them into darkness. Panic set in as they fumbled for their flashlights, their beams cutting through the thick blackness. "What just happened?" Tom exclaimed, his voice trembling. As they scrambled to relight the fire, they heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, drifting through the trees. "Join us! Join us!" The friends exchanged terrified glances, their hearts racing. "It's just the wind," Mark insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. They managed to reignite the fire, its warm glow providing a false sense of security. But the whispers grew louder, echoing around them, wrapping around their minds like a vice. "We should leave," Sarah urged, her voice shaking. "This isn't right." The others hesitated, torn between fear and the thrill of the unknown. Just then, a figure darted between the trees, too quick to identify. "Did you see that?" Lisa gasped, her eyes wide with terror. Mark, trying to maintain control, suggested they investigate. "It's probably just a deer or something," he said, though he felt a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Armed with their flashlights, they ventured into the darkness, the whispers growing louder with each step. The forest felt alive, the trees closing in around them, as if they were being watched. As they moved deeper into Eldergrove, the whispers transformed into anguished cries. "Help us! Help us!" The friends froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. "We need to go back," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. But before they could turn, the ground beneath them shifted, and they found themselves in a clearing they had never seen before. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, covered in moss and surrounded by strange symbols carved into the earth. The air was thick with an unnatural energy, and the whispers intensified, now a cacophony of voices pleading for release. "What is this place?" Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and shadows began to swirl around them, taking on human forms. The friends screamed, backing away from the altar, but the shadows advanced, their faces twisted in agony. "You shouldn't have come here," one of the figures hissed, its voice a chilling echo of the whispers. In a panic, the friends turned to run, but the shadows closed in, blocking their escape. "Join us! Join us!" they chanted, their voices rising in a haunting chorus. Mark, desperate to save his friends, grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward a narrow path between the trees. "This way!" he shouted, leading them away from the altar. They ran through the forest, the whispers chasing them, growing louder and more frantic. The trees seemed to shift and twist, disorienting them as they stumbled through the underbrush. Just when they thought they had escaped, they found themselves back at the altar, the shadows waiting for them. "Why won't you leave us?" one of the figures cried, its voice filled with sorrow. "We are trapped here, just like you will be." The friends huddled together, fear gripping their hearts. "We're not like you," Jake shouted defiantly, but deep down, he felt the weight of despair. With a surge of adrenaline, they broke free from the shadows and sprinted into the darkness, their flashlights flickering as they ran. The whispers faded into the distance, but the feeling of being watched lingered. They finally stumbled upon the campsite, the fire still smoldering, and collapsed in a heap, gasping for breath. As dawn broke, they packed their belongings in silence, the weight of their experience heavy on their shoulders. They left Eldergrove behind, but the whispers followed them, echoing in their minds. The forest remained, a dark sentinel, waiting for the next group of curious souls to wander in, unaware of the horrors that awaited them within its depths. Weeks passed, and the friends tried to return to their normal lives, but the experience haunted them. Mark found it hard to sleep, plagued by nightmares of the shadows and the whispers that called to him. Lisa became withdrawn, avoiding the woods altogether, convinced that something was still watching her. Tom, Sarah, and Jake attempted to shake off the fear, but the bond they had formed in the forest felt strained, as if the shadows had seeped into their friendship. One evening, Mark received a text from Jake, urging him to meet at their usual spot by the edge of Eldergrove. "We need to talk," the message read. Mark's heart raced as he recalled their harrowing experience. Reluctantly, he agreed to meet, hoping that confronting their fears together would help them heal. As Mark approached the forest, he felt a chill in the air, the trees looming overhead like sentinels. He spotted Jake standing at the edge of the clearing, his face pale and drawn. "I've been having dreams," Jake confessed, his voice trembling. "The shadows, they want something from us." Mark's stomach twisted at the thought. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "They keep calling my name," Jake continued, his eyes wide with fear. "I think we need to go back to the altar." Mark's heart sank. "Are you crazy? We barely escaped last time." "I know, but what if we can help them? What if they're trapped?" Jake pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. Against his better judgment, Mark agreed to accompany Jake back into Eldergrove. They ventured into the forest once more, the air thick with tension. As they approached the clearing, the whispers returned, wrapping around them like a shroud. "Join us. Join us," they echoed, sending shivers down Mark's spine. When they reached the altar, the shadows were waiting, their forms shifting and swirling in the dim light. "You've returned," one of the figures hissed, its voice a haunting melody. "Will you join us?" Mark and Jake exchanged terrified glances, but Jake stepped forward, his resolve firm. "We want to help you," he said, his voice shaking. "What do you need?" The shadows paused, their faces twisted in sorrow. "We are bound to this place, trapped by the darkness that consumes us. Only by offering a sacrifice can we be free." Mark's heart raced as he realized the implications of their words. "What kind of sacrifice?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "One of your own," the figure replied, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "A soul to take our place." Panic surged through Mark as he grasped Jake's arm. "We need to leave," he shouted, but Jake stood frozen, his gaze locked on the shadows. "No, we can't leave them like this," he insisted, his voice filled with determination. "Jake, don't," Mark pleaded, but it was too late. Jake stepped forward, offering himself to the shadows. "Take me," he said, his voice steady. "Let them go." The shadows surged forward, enveloping Jake in darkness. Mark screamed, reaching for his friend, but the shadows pulled him away, their whispers drowning out his cries. "Join us! Join us!" they chanted. And in an instant, Jake was gone. Mark stumbled back, his heart shattered. The shadows turned their gaze toward him, their eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and hunger. "You will join us too," they whispered, their voices echoing in his mind. With a surge of adrenaline, Mark turned and ran, the whispers chasing him through the forest. He sprinted through the trees, branches clawing at his skin as he fought to escape the darkness. The shadows pursued him, their laughter echoing in the night. Finally, he burst through the edge of the forest, collapsing on the ground as dawn broke. The whispers faded, but the weight of his loss hung heavy in the air. He had lost his friend to the darkness, and the shadows of Eldergrove would forever haunt him. In the weeks that followed, Mark struggled to cope with the loss of Jake. He found himself drawn back to the edge of the forest, unable to shake the feeling that Jake was still there, trapped in the shadows. He spent countless nights wandering the outskirts of Eldergrove, hoping to catch a glimpse of his friend or hear his voice calling out to him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark felt a familiar pull toward the forest. The whispers returned, soft and inviting. "Join us, join us, join." They beckoned, and he felt a surge of longing in his heart. With a heavy heart, Mark stepped into the darkness once more, determined to find Jake and bring him back. As he ventured deeper into Eldergrove, the shadows danced around him, their forms shifting and swirling in the dim light. "Jake!" he called, his voice echoing through the trees. "Where are you?" The whispers grew louder, wrapping around him like a shroud. "Join us! Join us!" they chanted, and Mark felt the darkness closing in. He pressed on, driven by the hope of reuniting with his friend. Finally, he reached the altar, the air thick with an unnatural energy. The shadows swirled around him, their faces twisted in sorrow. "You've returned," one of the figures hissed, its voice a haunting melody. "Will you join us?" Mark's heart raced as he realized the implications of their words. "I'm here for Jake," he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "Where is he?" The shadows paused, their faces shifting in the dim light. "He is one of us now," they whispered, their voices echoing in his mind. "You can join him, or you can leave." Torn between grief and the desire to be reunited with his friend, Mark felt the weight of the shadows pressing down on him. "I can't leave him," he said, his voice trembling. "I won't abandon him." With a surge of determination, Mark stepped forward, offering himself to the shadows. "Take me," he said, his voice steady. "Let Jake go." The shadows surged forward, enveloping him in darkness. "Join us! Join us!" they chanted, and in an instant, Mark felt himself being pulled into the void. As the darkness consumed him, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He was finally reunited with Jake, and together they would face the shadows of Eldergrove for eternity. The forest remained, a dark sentinel, waiting for the next group of curious souls to wander in, unaware of the horrors that awaited them within its depths. The whispers would continue to echo through the trees, beckoning the lost and the brave to join the ranks of the shadows, forever trapped in the darkness of Eldergrove.